Okay, yeah, I think we can start. Hi, everyone. I'm Ariel Moulet. I work at the Sofia Science Center at the Science Community Outreach team. Thanks for joining. So this is the third installment of our webinar series that is the Pipeline Week, where we show how to use the public pipeline to reprocess data that is in the archive. And today is our HAWC Plus Day. Tomorrow we will have our last installment with a FIFILS presentation. So today Sarah Eftekhadzadeh, who is an instrument scientist for HAWC Plus, has prepared a talk. It's pre-recorded as today she is busy putting HAWC Plus together, but we really appreciate it for this recorded talk, and I'll stop the video from time to time for questions. Please put your questions on the chat, and Sachin is online and will be able to answer many of these questions. So I think we can start. Stubbs, you can start the video when you want, and we'll check the sound, but that should work.
Hi, I'm Sarah Eftekhadzadeh, instrument scientist at Sofia, and this is a polarimetry data reduction demo to the interactive GUI. Just a reminder that HAWC has two observing modes, total intensity and polarimetry. Both of these modes can be performed with not-match chop or on-the-fly mapping, but the on-the-fly mapping has been offered since its commissioning as a shared risk. So observers have to consult with the instrument scientists to know whether this mapping is right for their science case. Just a quick refresher on the light path through the optomechanical assembly of Sofia telescope and HAWC, where on the right-hand side you see that the infrared light is guided through the Nasmyth tube via a tertiary dichroic toward the warm for optics, and eventually into the HAWC cryostat, where it undergoes reflection and transmission and gets absorbed by R and T detector arrays, respectively. And there goes the namesakes for those two arrays. This is a diagram shown in the Observer Handbook that shows the layout of the sub-arrays within the R and T detector arrays. The two 32 by 40 sub-arrays R0 and R1 with a small gap in between are available for total intensity. But the T detector array only has T0 sub-array available, and that's why for polarimetry we are limited to using R0 and T0 sub-arrays. So through the not-match chop observation mode, the data is taken in a two-point chop cycle. So as you can see in the GIF that is running right now on the left-hand side, the telescope just nodded into one position and now does chopping using the secondary mirror assembly on source and off source chop in a certain number and certain parameters. After that is done, it nods to the second nodding position, nod B, for example, and does the same on source, off source chopping as well. And so the four data points that are created symmetrically about the central object coordinates are shown on the right-hand side. This picture is also in the Observer Handbook. You see the green crosshair is a fixed position array deck on the sky, and you see the position of the extended source with respect to that green crosshair is changing in each of these dither positions. There are nominally 4 dither positions, but the number of dither positions could actually be higher. The link below tells you more about why this technique, chopping and nodding technique, has to be employed for thermal infrared observations. With this, I'm going to launch a GUI and only load one set of scans in editor position. I should mention that in polarimetry mode, at each of these 4 editor positions, 4 scans at 4 half-wave plate angles has to happen. And integrated into this observing mode are taking 2 internal calibrations, one at the beginning before all the 4 scans at 4 half-wave plate angles, and one at the end when the scans are done. So at each of these detail positions, one has to expect 6 files reducing all these 4 sets will make one complete not match up observations. Launch the GUI. The Conda environment Sofia Redux is already activated, and I have my raw files in raw folder already set. Once the files are loaded from their headers, the pipeline recognizes that this is the not match-up observation, so it loads the modules that are appropriate for this reduction. 21 modules have to be run in sequence. In here, you see that I can also set my output directory. It doesn't necessarily have to be the directory that I launched the GUI. I select the one that is already available, but you can always create a new folder and have a new output directory. For parameters, I'm going to also make sure that all my parameters are saved, and this is coming handy in the end when we're going to talk about doing automated mode and remote running of the pipeline on larger machines for batch runs, etc. So this will become handy. The parameters are going to be by default saved in redux_param.config. And so I'm going to do say, yes, save it and replace it with whatever it was. It will save all the default parameters or parameters that I edit. And if I edit anything, I'll be also directed in the
Right, thanks for stopping. Riwaj had a question about what is exactly raw data in this case, and for HAWC Plus, that's level 0. That's the one instrument where level 0 is used. Is that right, Sachin?
Yes, that's correct.
And also, I had a question that came up the other day. So when you're downloading raw data from the AOR, you have to take all the files that come with it. Or can you make some cuts or some sub-selections?
Depends what your observation is like, because if you just search URSA with your program ID, then you'll get all your observations. And let's say you select level 0, and let's say assume this is HAWC. But there may be multiple bands or multiple modes like OTF versus C2N. So when you're selecting, it is better to select the whole set and then reduce it each set individually. So if you have 3 sets of C2N observation, like what Sarah is telling now, she loaded in this in Redux only 6 files, and that is one set of data. But if you have multiple set, it's better to reduce all of those multiple set together. But for the demo purposes, because it is computationally intensive, she's showing you just one set.
Okay. How do you differentiate the different sets based on name files?
It's really straightforward. If you look at it, there will be I wish I had control over here, but if you go to the file information, then you can see that those four files are the 4 dither position, and the cal are the cal taken to the flat, taken one before and one after the set. So for C2N, it's always 6 file is a set. So two C2N polarization, two what do you say? 2 calibration files and 4 observation files.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. I don't see any more questions on this topic. Tubbs, can you continue playing?
If I have missed any of this, I can always look at this table, especially when I have more sets and things can get confusing. This table helps me to know whether I have missed any of the pole angles that I wanted or calibration files I wanted to load. If I want to add or remove, there is option for adding and removing the files. I can watch the log from here, and there are these header view. Primary header is here in a window, searchable. You can always look for a key and see anything about this anywhere. And once any product is saved and loaded in DS9, you can hit this and the interactive keys will tell you some hints about the photometry and the statistics on the image. One thing that is good to mention is once you launch your GUI, by default, if I restore the default of display setting, without changing anything, you will see that this disable DS9 is checked. That means that this DS9 is not allowed to be launched automatically and show any of the outputs that are being created one by one. And also, it always only shows the first extension of the FITS image. If you want to change that so that automatically DS9 pops up without me going into my output folder and just launch my or load my products one by one, you can just uncheck this box. And if I don't want to go and open the extension cube mode one by one, I can always set it so that it's always shown as a cube. I can browse through the extensions if I wanted to. I can also change the scale of the DS9 loading at first or any of these things. If I change my mind, I can always hit restore and go back to default. If I want to always have this, I can save this setting. A folder called .qad will be saved in my home directory. As long as this folder exists, anytime I launch the GUI, this will be the setting of the GUI. I can go and remove this folder and then everything will be back to the default set. With this, I'm going to only start one of this. I think I also want to mention that in this step, all the steps of these 21 modules are listed here. You can select to only run the pipeline until the certain step. And hit a step will make it so that all the steps through 5, to the end of 5, will be run. And then this side of the GUI will be again activated and you can actually undo. There will be this undo button that will take you back to the first step of the sets of steps that you had set. If you hit reduce, it will ignore anything that is in this step and finishes the reduction all the way through the last step. And because some of these steps are computationally extensive, and it will take some time, as well as it will turn on the fan to this computer and it muffles my voice. So I have learned that I should not hit run on this in a live demo. Just quickly, when you provide the cal files, the appending cal files, it will, you can watch what will happen when you run it. You accept pretty much all the outputs and all the parameters and hit run. This uses the two internal calibrations and creates a 6 extension file called flat file in a separate folder called flats, and it creates 2 PNG files that we are going to go and look at those. This is okay, so you see an error here. That's a good thing. It says, okay, well, DS9 is not accessible. Why? Because before I start this, I had something already loaded in my DS9, so it wasn't free to actually use the DS9 as it intended. I'm gonna reset because I only had one step run already. And I'm gonna run again. Now my DS9 is completely free to be loaded. I'm gonna run again. And So if the steps are too quick and you cannot read all the warnings in the steps that are more elongated, you can go and scroll up and see all the warnings and take a note about those if they become important at some point. So now, as you can see, without me prompting or opening the DS9, it got open in a multiple extension cube. I can browse through the 6 exposures of this. These are normalized gain values. At step number 5 here, when the flat correction is going to happen, these normalized gain values for R and T detector arrays are going to be applied to my detector signals. So there's also that pixel map for each of the detector arrays and the variance of these gain values. So the pipeline can make the correction for pixel to pixel gain variation. The most intensive part of this data reduction will be the demodulation, where the level 0 raw time streams of T and R detector arrays are going to be demodulated. And in order to find the good data, a number of filters are going to be applied on them. So, and also because the data has to be combined from the high and low chop positions, the pipeline has to demodulate the raw time streams with either a square or a sine wave to identify the low and high chop state and anything in between. The in-between states are going to be flagged to be removed, as well as all the line of sight rewinds and tracking errors also going to get flagged to be removed. All in all, this is a computationally intensive step and will take some time to run. And the result of this will be some DMD fits files. Because I have already run through this, I'm going to just open a new reduction and take you through the output of demodulation or DMD plots. I'm going to load those. Each time that you load for new reduction, you have to make sure that your output directory is set to what you intended, because if it's not, it will clutter other folders and create confusions for you. You can go and read about the definition of these parameters in the data reduction pipeline users manual, and just see if you have good reason to change any of this. But over the years, the pipeline has matured enough and the parameters have been fine-tuned enough that I recommend, and I think it's a good recommendation, to at least once go through the full reduction of your data with the set parameters as default, and look into the output and have a separate repo for all the changing parameters and running in different parameter sets and compare the results. Or if your research group or your team has a specific history of looking at this field and prior knowledge about this, that have compiled separate sets of parameters to be used, that would be a different story. But for educational purposes, I would always start with the default and then go from there. I'm going to make the demodulation plots. That should be a quick. 4 PNG plots are going to be created in the output directory, and we're going to just look into those. Those are loaded here, and I want to talk about, so the 4 poll scans on science and the calibration, the 2 calibration files generate plots, DM plots for them. So for science and calibration, the multi-panel plots are different. They contain different informations. The parts that you have to pay a special attention to are circled here. just to guide the eyes, I'm going to start with looking into diagnostics that you could do, looking at the cyan spot, and then we go to the calibration diagnosis. On the left-hand side are the PNG plots we just created for one of our 4 science exposures in one of our half-wave plates. And so the second panel, this is a diagnosis of a tracking, just making sure the tracking has been fine. As a comparison, and just to understand this feature, there is on the right-hand side, there is an abnormal exposure where you can see the tracking panel is showing different peaks in the tracking compared to what you have on the left-hand side. So just to introduce from the legend of this panel, you see that there are AOI 3 in blue and AOI 4 in red. Those are the standard, Sofia's standard housekeeping signals. And for HAWC, the standard is that blue AOI 3 has to be always active first compared to the AOR 4. If it's flipped, that would indicate some problem. And one other problem is the slow settling. As you can see on the right-hand side, there's a slow settling of the tracking to lower values. At places that you see a slow settling, you can see the equivalent effect of that on the detector signal in the bottom panel. For those stages where this has been a quick settling, there is no such spikes in the detector signal. And because this slow settling has shown its effect in the detector signal, you will see the effect of this in the final image as some sort of a smearing. And unless you have to, or you could just redact the set that contains this this effect, because as you know, if one of the 4 half-wave angles are compromised, the entire set could be omitted. There are possibilities for the set to be salvaged, but that has to be consulted with the data reduction pipeline experts and instrument scientists, especially if removing a set will have a significant effect on your final data signal-to-noise ratio. The other effect that we can talk about is vignetting. And these are also the abnormal exposures you see. If we can look at the flight number, they are early data. They are not, they are quite rare. They only appeared and were seen in early data. And usually they have to be redacted from the full stack of data. You can see there's a note here, the possible door vignetting. The ratio signals here has to be always less than 2 to make sure that there is no vignetting. You can see here it's more than 2, and the effect of it is shown in the detector signal with these spikes, and you can compare it with the normal exposure where you don't see any of this. One other thing that I had flagged in the original slide was the centroid EXP. For this panel, the importance is the regularity of the pattern and the amplitude of this pattern. And the height and the regularity of this pattern will say things about the nodding efficiency of the observation throughout the exposure time. Now going to diagnosis plot of a calibration exposure. You see the content is different. The most important part is the third panel, the layout of the R and T detector arrays are shown. The title of these panels are showing the median of the phase offset. The sign of these values are not as important as the absolute value, because these are just the phases. And so comparing to an abnormal exposure, you see the phase offset is as high as 30 degrees, whereas normally it should be only a few degrees. So just to know what that is, so during the demodulation step again, So the pipeline also corrects for the phase delay in the readout of each pixel relative to the chopper signal. So then the DM diagnosis plots show the median of the detector chopper phase shift. The phase shift is assumed to be time independent throughout the exposure, and that's what pipeline assumes to be. If this phase shift is greater than 10 degrees, it can have a significant effect on the final data product. And if it's less than 10, it can be handled in the pipeline. So that's something to be careful about, although during the observing night, multiple exposures, calibrations are being taken, and this value is being monitored carefully because the high phase offsets indicate electromechanical problems with the instrument that have to be.
Hey, wanted to interrupt for a second the video. Sachin, do you have more comments on the diagnostic plots? Are those things that one would regularly see issues in? Is that part of your routine?
That's right. I was just about to say for you to pause this to have questions. So let's open up question. If people have question, either you can type it in the chat or unmute yourself and ask us. But Sarah spoke a lot of the stuff, and this is basically if you want to think of this is the heart, the soul of the C2N observation for HAWC polarimetry. These plots are very important to diagnose whether your observation has succeeded or not, or if there were any issues like Sarah mentioned. Sarah showed some of the issues in the video. So please ask questions if you have any.
Nothing's coming up, but yeah, maybe
Okay,
we can continue the video, but
yeah,
we can stop anytime.
yeah.
Sorted out before going further into observations. So hopefully the data that you download from the IRSA Sofia archive will not be affected, but it's always good to keep an eye and make sure your data is safe from these effects. Just the note that there's a flowchart in the data reduction pipeline user manual. So this flowchart, I just wanted to quickly mention that when I look at the name tags of the steps in the GUI and look at them side by side with the steps that are mentioned in this flowchart, I can make a one-on-one map of each of the steps with the flowchart, which is neat when you are feeling lost about the actual processes that are happening to data structure at each of these steps. The name tags of these gray boxes actually are carefully showing the actual processing that are happening on the data structure. I found it good to keep an eye on and remember the logic. So once the module, all the 21 modules have been finished, the final product will be the polarization map, and the quality cuts have been applied, and then you will have some vectors. There's a region file that is also created, so when you load your final polarization map in DS9, you can also load the region file that contains the polarization vectors that have passed the quality cuts that you applied in this state prior to making polarization map. So now we can, because we didn't want to go one by one, and now we are going to do it independently as multiple extension cube and look at the PMP map for this. I'm gonna zoom fit. The scale, I want prefer this, and then you can just play with the scale, stretch the colors, however you can actually better see all the features, and you can browse through the to the extensions. I'm gonna also load a region file that was created right for this map. We start right here. And I'm gonna make sure that it's loaded on all the extensions. I don't know if you can actually see this. You see that only 2 vectors have survived the quality cut. We can and will play with this parameters just as a showing in this demo, but playing with the quality cuts have to be more carefully done scientifically, given the target and the field that you're looking at, and the astrophysical information you have on the field, and making sure that you are not actually introducing biased vectors by relaxing some of these quality cuts. I'm gonna open a new reduction because I don't want to go through making the entire merge map. The last step before these vectors being computed, and the last saved file that I have is a merged map. So I'm gonna just load a merge map. You can see when a merge map is loaded, it's understood that only computing vectors and applying quality cuts and making polarization map are the steps. Have to again make sure that you set the output directory to be somewhere. Now I actually want, because I'm changing anything, I'm going to say new parameters, and then I create that new directory. Computing vectors, these effective values I don't want to change. So I run it. I'm going to apply quality cuts. So the mini-SIGI, although there are definitions of all of this, you can read about them in the manual. But the mini-SIGI is essentially the Stokes I over its sigma, or its error. It is set to only the vector for the vectors that have the I over sigma I greater than 200 to survive the cut. We can relax this slightly. 100 would still be a good number and limit to look at. Again, my DS9 is not available because I have loaded something independently. I'm gonna close it so that when I run the next step, now I can again see my map, and when I run my polarization map, more vectors, as you can see, now survived those cuts. We talked about how we have to be careful about relaxing this. When we were talking about vignetting, the effect of vignetting can show up in the final map in multiple ways. And it's very important that one pays attention to the correlated vectors in the polarization map. That would be an indication of vignetting effect found its way to the final product. Because of the nature of the sequential getting scans in each of the 4 half-fit plate angles, everything, even like a vignetting in a small isolated part of a time stream is going to affect the entire time stream. And also when there is you can actually browse one of the other places that the vignetting can affect is the uncertainties in the Stokes Q, and gradients in Stokes I, and gradients and excess in error of Stokes I. So one could load this in a notebook and actually make a histogram and find the excesses in each of these maps and the anomalous values in uncertainties of the Stokes Q and U, and the gradients in that could be visible in Stokes I map. Those are all responsibilities of the investigating teams when they receive their data, and they have to pay special attention to the meaning of what they are getting, and finding correlations, and also paying attention to whether in the polarization flux which is one of the extension in this file. The concentration of the vectors is following the concentration of the intensity of the polarized flux. That would be also a good indication whether you are including more of the low quality vectors by relaxing or changing your quality cuts, etc. Yeah, so there is also a PNG file created that shows colors. The colors are showing a Stokes eye intensity, and the number of contours can be changed through the parameter box in the GUI. And if I reset this, you can also see that you can actually change the contour color and number of that, and the coloring scheme, the number of contours, all of that, and the scale vector of the vectors that are showing. And so yeah, when you change your quality cuts, you can see the change of the vector numbers in here. The title of this PNG plot also shows the quality cuts that were applied and the number of vectors that survived those cuts. And the next plot that you are making, when you change it, will have a different title, so you can actually have them saved in and compare the two. So after that, I just wanted to also point out, as I'm sure it's been advertised, there is a section dedicated to data quality assessment once in the user manual. So, and the multiple tips and notes for where to put attention when the data products are completed, which data products have to be more carefully examined, and what effect would have to make you to be paying attention to each of the prior steps. Looking into the header of your calibrated flux, the underscore cal files, and looking at the keyword cal factor in your headers from the calibrated flux onward. There will be this cal factor and its error that you may want to see and see how it's applied. And you will also, as we did, load your region files, look into quality cuts, find out whether some of those vectors are shown in the edges of the array, if you see any anomaly in the distribution of those, and or correlation, correlated vectors. And if you've downloaded your data from airsoft file, you're familiar with these links in here. These are, you can click on those, and what will show up is notes like this, a few sentences. They could contain some keywords that are defined in the website. I'm going to also open up. And these are the quality assessment notes that the data reduction team had put in. As you are doing your own investigation, it's good to always pay attention to what's been said. The PIs of the teams have received this together with their data, and so they would know about what is the opinion of the quality assessment team about the general condition of the data. That doesn't necessarily mean that every effect and all the scientific interpretation.
Okay, I'm stopping now to give an opportunity to Sachin to comment on data quality assessment and cal factor header keyword. Do you think this covered the main things you look about data quality assessment?
Sure. So you may know that once the pipeline has run on all the data from a flight or from a flight series, there are a bunch of what do we call QA scientists who go in and take a look at basically everything that the pipeline has done. Many of those things are automated, so we catch issues that happen routinely, and if need be, we go ahead and manually reduce those data and correct it. And whenever there is a manual reduction done or anything that is done out of nominal, any off nominal cases, that's the time when we put QA notes in the headers of the data, in the FITS header, which you will get by clicking on those quality assessment links in URSA. So you may see things like during one of the files, tracking was lost, so we'll throw the file out. Or you may see reasons for bad pixels, so those pixels were masked in a different way. Or you may see things like, what else? Let's see. Yeah, only what instead of 4 did the position, only 3 were available. So, you may have some bad pixels. So those are the kind of information that is there. And as Sarah told you at the beginning of this talk, that it is always good to first go and reduce your data, if you want to reduce your data on your own, to reduce it in the default mode. And when you do that, if you look at our notes and do the same thing that we have done, then the output should match exactly what is in the archive. So now you have sort of benchmarked what we have done. And then you can go ahead, and if you want to change anything, like you want to, as Sarah said, you want to change your quality cut. Our quality cuts on data is very conservative because we want to show only the best data possible. But maybe for your science case, you can relax that a bit. So as she did, she used the minimum sigma a little, or the sig value to a lower flux level, and that's okay if you want to do it. But you have to be careful. That's purely now it's a question of scientific analysis, so it depends on your source, what you're trying to get at, so on and so forth. And as for the calibration, I don't want to speak a lot about that in this talk. We already had a calibration talk in the past, and it is posted on our website. So anyone who is interested in HAWC calibration should refer to that talk. And if you have questions, definitely send it to us through Sofia Help Desk. Any
Okay.
questions?
I don't see anything coming up.
Thanks.
Well, okay. Thank you. And Tubbs, you can hit play again.
Is done, that will be the responsibility of the science team and investigating team. If you go to this page, which I'm sure has been mentioned, you can see the PDF of the latest version of the data reduction manual for each of the instruments and definition of the levels, paying attention to level 0, that is specifically for the time streams of the HAWC Plus instrument. Other instruments will have their raw data stored as level 1. You can see definition of all these levels and the timeline where each of these data have to be, where the teams could actually expect their output. And there is a tab for quality assurance and known issues. There is a summary of the keywords that if you click on this quality assessment, some of these keywords may have been mentioned. So you have the keywords and you can actually know what they mean, what to be nominal, usable, or problem. And also, go back to this, there is a table of known issues for each of the observing cycles. And if you click, as we go through different cycles, if you click on those cycles and the flights there, you can get the specific.
I can't see the video anymore. It's blank.
In each of
that's true.
Yeah.
Me too.
So
different instruments. If you click on this quality assessment, some of these keywords may have been mentioned. So you have the keywords and you can actually know what they mean, what to be nominal, usable, or problem. And also, now go back to this, there is a table of known issues for each of the observing cycles. And if you click, as we go through different cycles, if you click on those cycles and the flights there, you can get the specific problem and known issue, for example, for HAWC in each of these cycles. And different instruments also have their dedicated tables with known issues. These are all good to pay attention to. So now in the remainder of time, we can actually go and move on to the on-the-fly mapping reduction demo. This is a picture from the observer manual. You can read about what the on-the-fly scanning procedure looks like in terms of the optomechanical assembly and the movements of the optical components to make this mapping happen. Just very briefly, the telescope is driven to follow a parametric curve at a non-repeating period. And as the scan progresses, longer in time, more and more of the area defined by the scan amplitude will be covered. And so this is how Lissajous pattern will cover this defined area. We can just go and start a new reduction for on-the-fly mapping. On-the-fly mapping doesn't have a two appending internal calibration as part of their observing module. And so only 4 files for 4 half-wave plate angles will be loaded. If there is any problem or you are missing one, or some of the half-wave plates haven't moved exactly to the intended angle, you will see an error very early on. So you can actually be alert about that. Same thing, first the headers get checked, and the construction of the scan map is the iterative step. And so because it's iterative, there is no intermediate file to be saved other than final product that will be with the tag name SMP. And so each of these deep, faint, and extended modes, if you click on them, that would take you to a different configuration of the pipeline to be used. You will see that when you click on here, as the log will say that the deep.cfg file configuration has been activated. Again, the recommendation is to not use any of this unless you do not see the proper and desired or expected result in using the default parameters. They will invoke more aggressive filtering, and the result would be less flux for the extended sources if you use the deep or faint. And so unless the object cannot be seen without using the faint option, that is not recommended. We can discuss these options further in the questioning from the audience. And then you can run it. It will be also very computationally intensive and time consuming. I have the output ready, and I can show you a scan map that gets constructed from the default parameters. Again, opening as multiple extension cube, looking at SMP map, making sure the scales are custom to your eye and how you are comfortable with seeing it. And so when we were talking about, it's very important to look at all the extensions as opposed to only the first one. You can maybe see the effect of this or what I was trying to point out here as we are browsing through this through the extensions here. That'll be T, half wave plate 0, and half wave plate 1. You see, well, now we see this streak called worm or holes. These are bad pixels that weren't properly redacted from the array, and so they are called worms or holes. And you see it has affected not all, but some of the half wave plate, some of the array. In R, it's seen here. So now is we are motivated to actually see if we can fix for this through using different options than default. And that'll be a good example to, oh, I'm gonna actually see, you don't need to necessarily see a dark streak for the negative values. You see here, these values, these streaks are also not a scientific feature here. So these are also showing up as bad pixels. So going back to, and because again, I do not want to run this, I just quickly mention once I see this, so what I can do is to activate this parameter. You can read about this, and that will have different filtering that will make sure this effect is removed. So more powerful, more aggressive filtering there. So when you run the scan map, we can now see the, let's have a different frame. I have saved it under a different parameter, under a different folder. So now I can look at that scan map and go through the extensions all the way to go to half wave plate 1 for R detector array. All right, so for this one, I'm going to go back to so you can see by applying that parameter fixed jump, so that's activated and the effect is removed. That's an example of trying to first running it with one with the default and then see where you have to actually change those. Just very quickly, going back to why it was good to save parameters at the beginning when we loaded the chop node set and we saved the parameters. Then when you want to run the pipeline automatically, you can just type in redux underscore pipe dash h, and it will tell you the options of what you can do. The -c, you can actually have your tailored parameter file, meaning that now that you have a saved sets of parameters as default, you can go open that text file. It will look like something like this. You can edit any of these parameters that you feel has to be edited for your customized setting. It has all the way through the 21 modules for the NodMat chop, for example. But if you don't want to do it all the way through and you want to start, for example, from step 19 right after the flux calibration, you can just omit all the other steps with exception of the remaining steps to 21, and you can also change the minisigi as to a different value and save it and run it. You can point the output to be saved in a different directory. And if you don't do any of it and just simply just put your raw fits file addresses in this text file, it will assume that you want a default configuration. And that's how you can actually have your data in some larger machine, a more powerful machine, and have your large batches to be run remotely. once you actually done for a small set in your local machine and learned about which parameters you want to change, now is the time to apply that to your full batch, and that's the way to go for it. Just quickly, because we did not mention much about calibration in this demo, there in a school, in Sofia school in February 2022, Dr. Sachin Shenoy briefly in a 27-minute video provided an overview of the HAWC Plus calibration process that I recommend to watch that short video to get familiar with the calibration process in HAWC data. Other resources, like I said, that page that has all the manual links and the table of known issues is here. And there's always emailing the help desk and asking questions from the help desk. If you
Okay, I'm stopping now to give an opportunity to Sachin if you had any comment on the different options, faint, extended, point. I think Sarah covered everything, but if you had some personal insights on...
Yeah, sure. I would, those are the options for generating scan maps. Basically, that has to do with filtering, because the way you do is you filter the data to get your source and reduce the background and all those things. But all of those options come with an expense. You don't get something for free. So and all of those options will heavily filter your data. So you have to be really careful before using those options. Use it only if your source is really faint and you can maybe see it in one scan. Then you can try to enhance it by using the faint option. But the deep and extended are very specific for a certain kind of object. So if you don't have a source that is really extended, then don't use extended. When you use extended, yes, some of the extended emission you can see, but the backgrounds will get affected and it will do some crazy stuff in filtering. So you have to be very careful. You should know what you're doing before doing that. And I would strongly recommend, if you are going to use any of those options, first you have to make sure that you have read the data reduction, the pipeline document that is linked here. That will give you a brief synopsis of what all those parameters do. But I would also recommend that you read the paper by the Crush paper by Attila, so that you know exactly what is happening, how that filtering happens, is it appropriate for data or not. So those are parameters for expert usage and not for regular. And to be honest, if we have done our job, most of these things are done during QA. If we see that a source may have some advantage of using a faint flag, then we'll go ahead and do it in our reduction and put that on the URSA archive and write a comment saying that this has been reduced by using a dash faint flag. So you won't have to do that. The same thing with what Sarah showed, that streak of bad pixels. We go through each of those extensions of the maps and identify these things and use various options to get rid of this. So hopefully, if again, as I said, you won't have to do any one of this. But we are all human, and when we have to do QA of 15 flights within a given time, we may miss something. That's the reason this tutorial is important, so you know what you need to do. Please ask questions.
Okay, thank you. We're really running near the top of the hour, but there's time for a question if there's one. I can't see anything. Well, you know how to reach us, help desk. So thank you for everyone for joining. I'll thank Sarah for preparing this nice presentation, and thanks Sachin for handling all the questions.
Definitely. Thank you, Sarah. That was great.
Bye, everyone.